Hello, everyone. This is Michael Haspel. As you may have guessed, this is actually episode 5 and not episode 3. It is, however, part 3 of our discussion of Conan the Barbarian. And this is a re-recording, so this episode was not recorded in front of a live studio audience like the other ones are, because we had some serious technical difficulties, and so I'm re-recording the episode. So it's going to be a little bit odd. I have not done this before, but it'll let me test a different format. So without much further ado, let's do this. 5, 4, 3, hands on keys, turn. There comes a time, thief, when the jewels cease to sparkle, when the gold loses its luster, when the throne room becomes a prison, and all that is left is a father's love for his child. And that quote from King Osric is actually kind of where the story begins. If this was a D&D adventure, that is actually where you get the mission, to go on the quest and everything. Before that, it's all backstory. And there's another quote that sets this part of the story up. And it's from Ron Cobb, who was the art director, I believe, or the production designer on the film. And he played the Black Lotus street peddler. Now, also, John Milius also played a guy who was kind of a lizard on a stick fast food vendor when they're moving through Shadizar. And that footage does exist. You can find it on YouTube and everything, but it's really, really bad. And I think that Milius did a really good job of cutting himself out of that sequence. But the Black Lotus street peddler, you guys will remember him because he really does stand out. And it's production designer Ron Cobb, and Subutai comes up and asks about, they're going around asking about the snakes, and Subutai's like, how about 2 snakes coming together over a black sun, a magnificent standard? And the street peddler answers, the only snakes I know are those of the Set and his cursed towers. Their evil is spread to every city. 2 or 3 years ago, it was just another snake cult. Now, they're everywhere. It is said that they are deceivers. They murder people in the night. I know nothing. And then he offers Subutai and Conan some drugs, which we find out is called Black Lotus. And he says it's Stygian, the best, It's interesting because in Howard's stories, the Stygia is associated with ancient Egypt. And of course, he mentions the Towers of Set, and they show Tower of Set during this thing. It's a really beautifully made miniature. Works very, very well, actually. It still holds up. A lot of the effects and everything were actually miniatures that they used for like wall extensions or to make the existing Spanish locations look more exotic than they were. And but what's interesting about this, just from my point of view, I'm kind of an amateur, Egyptophile, I would say. And it wouldn't really be the Tower of Set, because Set is not associated with snakes. It should be the Tower of Apep, who many people, especially Stargate fans, will know by his Greek name, Apophis. And Apep or Apophis or Isfet, that's actually the snake that battles Ra every during the night when Ra takes his solar barge and goes out of view. Essentially, he's battling Apep, and but Howard didn't really pay attention to this, and Milius stayed true to Howard in a sense that he's just taking, just kind of choosing pieces out of history as he sees fit. And we know this already. We've seen Norse stuff show up. We've seen Pictish scouts. We've seen all kinds of different things. So this is no different and everything like that. But what's interesting about this sequence was where they get to know the Tower of Set. Towards the end of the Shadowzar sequence, we get a very strange little moment. So Subutai and Conan are walking along a wall, and it seems almost like an ADR conversation because you can't see their faces. They're chewing the Black Lotus and walking away. And Subutai gives a whole lot of exposition. And he says, the Tower of Set said to have riches beyond compare, and the eye of the serpent, a jewel that's like beyond all the other riches. So he sets that whole thing up. And the story could actually, if the audience was familiar with Subutai and Conan already, you could start the story here. And this is setting up, I'm gonna dive into kind of Joseph Campbell's monomyth construct. And if you're wanting to be a storyteller and you have not heard of the monomyth or the hero's journey, I highly encourage you to read The Hero with a Thousand Faces or The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. These are pivotal books, and even if you don't, in the last couple of years, that construct has become maligned because people start using it as a checklist, especially Hollywood. So you start seeing a lot of these movies that kind of fit the bill, that they just go, we're just going to use this as a checklist, and here's this stage and this stage and this stage and this stage. But it becomes very, very handy to understand the phases of the monomyth as a storyteller, even if you think you're not going to use it. But chances are you're probably using it and just don't know. But when you're conversing with, say, a producer or editors or anybody who's involved in the storytelling collaborative process, it really works easily as a shorthand to just go, this will be, refusal of call, or this will be, resurrection or something like that. And it works as a good shorthand so you can make sure you're all on the same page. Because if somebody says, hey, this is the belly of the whale, and you go, no, this is crossing the threshold, that's kind of a problem, So you want to narrow that down as much as you can. And the Tower of Set sequence that really starts the story of Conan the Barbarian. In modern storytelling, unfortunately, everything that comes before the Tower of Set, we would regard as backstory. And unfortunately, it would either be cut as like a prologue or something, or it would be incorporated in some kind of a flashback sequence. That's what you'd see most often in modern day. But luckily for us, we get this whole introduction to Conan, and we're able to relish in it and everything before the adventure even starts. So now we go into basically what is Conan's ordinary world, and it's this Tower of Set sequence, and where he meets one of the most important characters in the film, Valeria. And we're going to take a quick little side trip here to talk about her in a little bit. But the sequence from the Tower of Set comes from Robert E. Howard's story called The Tower of the Elephant. And what's interesting here is that in the garden of the Tower of the Elephant, Conan meets this guy named Taurus, who is known as the Prince of Thieves. And Taurus goes in, they all go into the Tower of the Elephant. There's some kind of weird monstrosity in there, and Taurus dies in the story. So I apologize for spoilers, but these stories are almost, they're 80 years old, 90 years old, and the film is pretty old too. So I'm sorry I'm giving some spoilers away. But yeah, so Taurus dies in the story. Valeria kind of takes the part of Taurus in the Tower of Set sequence. So they go into the garden and they run into Valeria. And, she stalks up on them and everything, and she kind of just scoffs at them because, Conan realizes that when he sees her, he's like, you're not a guard. And she's like, neither are you. And he's like, yeah, we came to climb the tower. And she's like, you don't even have a rope. And that's when we start seeing that Valeria is kind of smarter than Conan and Subutai. She's really the brains of the operation, which is kind of interesting because if you compare it to, say, Star Wars, that a lot of films were imitating at the time, even unconsciously. I mean, if you look at the poster for Star Wars and then you look at the poster for Conan the Barbarian, there are some aesthetic similarities just in the poses of the characters and stuff. And Leia is definitely the brains of the operation in Star Wars. You know, Han and Luke is very naive, and Han, even though he's storied, he's brave to the point of being foolhardy. He's kind of just crazy. And we kind of see that same dynamic playing out in Conan, which is very interesting. And what's sad about this scene a little bit is that this scene was cut from the movie. There's a cut in there. So when Valeria shows up and sees them, and she's just kind of like, she says, "You're two fools who laugh at death," you know? And there's another line, you know, where she introduces herself and she says, "I am Valeria." And when she says that, Subutai actually knows who she is. He goes, "I've heard of you. They call you the Queen of Thieves. You're a master. Where are your brigands?" And she answers, "They're cowards and lackeys, scared of Set and Thulsa Doom." So it's just kind of interesting that when they cut that scene, unfortunately, we never learned Valeria's name. That was the only time in the entire film that Valeria actually said her name, or that anybody actually says her name. So we only know she's called Valeria because of the credits, or if you read the novelization. Now, the character of Valeria is not new to Conan. She was not created for the film. She was adapted from a character in a story called The Red Nails, which is actually the last story written by Robert E. Howard before he killed himself. And she is a pirate, kind of a pirate queen from the Red Brotherhood. And that's where Valeria comes from. She's not really a love interest for Conan. He has another woman that he meets named Belit, who winds up coming back from the dead to save him and all this stuff. So some of what happens with Valeria was taken from Belit. But she's not really in the story. She's not really a love interest for Conan, although she definitely becomes that in the film. So they go into the tower, and we see a couple of interesting things happen. Valeria kind of takes control while she's in the garden. You know, obviously she's the wittiest of the three, and she says, "Do you know what horrors lie beyond those walls?" And Conan's kind of, you know, macho and bold, although he's just very, very naive in the ways of the world. So he's like, "No," all brave and everything. And she's like, "Good, then you go first," and like suckers him into going first. As soon as we get into the tower, a couple of things happen. We see Rexor for the first time. He's Thulsa Doom's kind of second in command. In fact, we learn that he is, you know, Valeria mentions that he's second only to Thulsa Doom, and he's some kind of high priest. But this is the first time we've seen him since the beginning, and he's not the marauder guy. He's kind of in these ceremonial priest robes, and he's getting ready to do this whole sacrifice and everything. Valeria really takes command at this point. She goes, "Hey, I'll take this level. You guys go down and find out whatever you can," and everything like that. And so Conan and Subutai go down there. There's a whole sequence where Subutai was supposed to fight like a mutant three-eyed hell thing, and that was cut out. Conan goes and he encounters like a huge snake. And if you haven't seen this film, when I say huge, I mean it is easily 4 feet in diameter around. I mean, this thing is absolutely massive. And they play with a really cool thing. The snake is coiled around a pillar, and in this middle of this pillar is the eye of the serpent, this jewel. And it's kind of a ruby that's fist size. It's huge, right? So Conan sees it, and it's sparkling there, and it's looking awesome and everything. And he reaches for the jewel, but a drop of his sweat falls on the snake and kind of wakes it up because it was sleeping. And even though they're being quiet, his sweat dripping on it woke him up. Now, this parallels a story called the Scarlet Citadel. Now, in the Scarlet Citadel, it's kind of reversed. Conan's chained to a wall, and he can't move. This huge snake comes in, and and it's looking for food, and he's staying stock still and not breathing and everything. And the snake has such venomous, such venom dripping from its fangs. A drop of the acid venom falls on Conan, and he basically just has to use his will, even though this venom is like drilling into his thigh, not to move so that this snake won't discover him. And I think that's where they got the whole drop of sweat falling and waking up the snake. A fun fact here is that they built this gigantic animatronic snake to do the whole thing, and regrettably, it couldn't move very much. It was very strong. It could hold like 4 or 5 guys on top of it, but it really couldn't move. So they also had this like giant rubber snake that that they would use to that was like with a bunch of ropes, guidelines and stuff, and that's what they would use to like move stuff around. And it's just kind of crazy. They through some creative editing and some really good splicing and implied motion and stuff. If you watch that sequence, the snake actually doesn't move all that much, but through the use of not showing you certain things, showing you character reactions, showing you Arnold coiled up in this thing, even though you never saw it coil him up, in some creative editing, they're able to really pull off some really incredible maneuvers with this and sell this snake gag. And it's actually really cool. So Subutai winds up shooting some arrows into the snake to free Conan. And Conan chops its head off just as the sacrifice up top is getting ready to jump into this pit, and she's going to be the snake's dinner. So this whole ceremony is going on. There's some really creepy music that Basil Polidoris put together with like some reed flutes and stuff, and it sounds altogether prehistoric and very suitable to the scene. Fun fact on this part was that when Subutai shoots the arrows into the snake, a modern day film, or I would dare say almost any other film, would have some kind of a special effect where the arrows kind of are built into the snake and they pop out or something, so that it looks realistically like you're shooting arrows into it. Milius's solution was to shoot arrows into this rubber snake. He wound up doing it himself. And I wish I could tell you it's because John Milius was some kind of Olympic level archer and a really, really good shot. No, he was just kind of the best archer on set that day. And so it just continues the entire tradition of Conan the Barbarian, just doing things kind of by brute force and force of will, frankly. And it's just really funny. So Valeria, they wind up climbing up. They're climbing up the rope, and the sacrifice throws herself down in the pit. Of course, she lands. She's still alive. All her bones are broken or whatever. She's screaming, and Rexor and all the guards are now alerted that, hey, something's gone wrong and somebody killed the snake. And they jump up and they see Subutai and Conan like climbing back up out of the tower. Valeria is there, and not for the first time, she saves their bacon because she's the one who finds the escape route. They get up top, and they're just standing there like, hey, now what do we do? We just got to the top of the tower. What do we do? And Valeria has disguised herself as a priestess of the cult. So it's only after like Rexor, she's right next to Rexor, and it's only when Rexor like looks at her and is like, hey, what's going, like, I don't know you, that she stabs one of the guards, wraps a rope around his head and uses him as a counterweight. And then she's able to just shoot right up out of the tower. When she gets to the top, it's also interesting to know she's obviously, if we're talking like D&D levels or whatever, she's the higher level character. It's like, obviously she's done this before. She knows what's going on. So she decides that she's going to, she looks over the side. There's a pool in the garden, and she just utters her catchphrase, "Do you want to live forever?" And she's over the side and laughing as she falls. Like, she doesn't even care. She's done this a dozen times. It's just easy peasy for her. But for Conan and Subutai, well, we don't know about Subutai. But for Conan, this is definitely a first for him. And that's kind of his ordinary world. Now we go and break into this whole sequence where it shows them celebrating and just partying it up, and they're spending all kinds of, money and everything like that. And when they show this sequence, it's really telling, because Conan is sitting in front of a table, and he's got all these jewels and riches and all this loot that they took from the Tower of Set. Conan's not looking at any one of them. He's looking at Valeria and nothing else. Like, she completely captivates his attention. And I honestly think Arnold did a really good job in this scene, kind of conveying that Conan really didn't care about the jewels at all. Like, to him, they don't really mean anything. He's never had any riches. He's never had any means except what he could come up with or what was kind of given to him when he was being kind of a slave pack animal. So he doesn't value these things. And he uses the eye of the serpent almost like an erotic kind of turn-on tool to Valeria, because she obviously cares about the jewels. So it's just an interesting side note. They quickly kind of just get partied out. There is a scene, though, that I do want to break and talk about. And it's a scene where it's the love scene in Conan, where Conan and Valeria get together. And what's interesting is the music in this scene. In a lot of other movies, though, that music during the love theme will be called something usually after the female lead's name. So it'll be like Leia's theme or Marion's theme, or they'll go the other way and just go like the love theme from whatever, love theme from The Spy Who Loved Me, or love theme from whatever. And the theme in the Conan soundtrack, this music is called Wifing. And I think it's really, really important about that. And I'll get to talking about that in a little bit, but that suits one of the categories that women kind of fall into in this film. And much of Sword and Sorcery, I would argue. So Conan is not doing some kind of a one-night stand with Valeria. She's becoming his wife. And it is a scene that gets reinforced later on. Now, at this part, it's unclear whether or not Conan is Valeria's husband. But Valeria is definitely Conan's wife. And we kind of see they get, afterwards, they've been partying, they get caught. They get taken before King Osric, right? Again, Valeria is the first one. She's quick to think, because Valeria and Conan got caught, Subutai didn't get caught. So when King Osric confronts them and says, "Hey, I thought there were 3 of you," she's just like, "Oh yeah, our partner was eaten by the lion." She just comes up with a stupid lie, but it's better than what Conan would have done. Conan is very much an innocent still throughout this movie. He's an innocent boy who doesn't really understand why his village was attacked. He's innocent when he's basically a beast of burden when he gets put on the wheel of pain. So he doesn't know anything. He is an innocent when he gets thrown into the gladiator pit. He doesn't even understand that he's supposed to fight the other gladiator until the other gladiator hurts him. And even though he gets educated, and exposed to all this stuff, he's still very kind of naive and innocent to the ways of the world. So he doesn't know how to lie at all. It's Valeria that has to lie. And then, of course, Subutai comes in. But one of the things that I liked about this is this word, when they introduce King Osric. They introduce, we hear Mako, who is the chronicler, and he's doing a voiceover. And he says, they were taken before King Osric, called the Usurper. Now, right in there's a whole ton of backstory applied to a simple word, usurper. And then he says, he was once a powerful Northman like my lord, talking about Conan, So we know that King Osric essentially became king by his own hand, and he took the throne by force. That kind of becomes important because there's a whole subtext of political intrigue that's going on in Conan, and some of that was lost when they edited some scenes out of the film. But a lot of it is still there. So we get, King Osric called the usurper, and this is actually where the adventure of the film really begins. And it's the call to adventure. He says, okay, here's this deal. My daughter has been taken, and she hasn't really been taken. She's joined up with Thulsa Doom, and we learn that she is to be his, and I'll come back to that sentence because that's going to lead off into a segue I don't want to deal with just right this second. But he shows the fangs of the serpent, which is this elaborate dagger that has kind of two blades to it, and we learn a little bit about this apocalyptic cult of Thulsa Doom. Now, it's downplayed in the film, but there is essentially a conspiracy to wipe out all the monarchies, all the leaders of this ancient world to cause kind of an apocalyptic event. And in the screenplay, we get a line from Thulsa Doom, and it sounds very, very Charles Manson, kind of very Reverend Jim Jones. And I'll read it and just forgive my unable to do a good James Earl Jones impression. But this is Thulsa Doom speaking. He says, "When I, your father, ask, will you take life from me? Will your hand clutch the dagger and strike true to the infidel heart? Many of you are about to go back to the world, to the leaders, judges, and parents who lied to you and led you astray. The day of doom is at hand, the great cleansing." Now, that part was cut from the film, but we do hear a little bit of echoes of that speech at the end of the film, at the very end of the film. But also at the end of the film, it takes on a different tone. It's less Charles Manson and more Jim Jones. And I'll get to that in episode 5 when we break that part down. So anyway, we know that there's this whole apocalyptic cult and everything like that, and they're trying to take it over. And to bring it back, Osric says, as we speak, she travels to the mountain of power. She is to be his, right? And he's talking about Princess Yasmina, and he gives them and of course her name is not even mentioned in the film at all. We do have a deleted scene where they see her in Shadizar, and Conan asks something like, who was that girl, the one of beauty with the snakes who spoke to me? And Subutai answers, that girl, ha! That was no girl. That was the Princess of Shadizar, you fool. So, but that's it. And we never learn her name. I think the only reason I know it's Yasmina is because I think it's in the novelization. They never mention her at all. But Osric says, go and steal my daughter back. He offers all these treasures and offers up the quote that I started the episode with, that, the jewels don't matter anymore. All he cares about is his daughter. He's grown old, and that's going to be his legacy. And he doesn't care about the jewels. So he gives them riches beyond what they could imagine. And he's like, enough to be kings yourselves. So before we go on, I'm going to take a little segue here and talk about women in Conan the Barbarian. And it might seem a little bit strange, but right now, we now have all the major players of women on the table. We've actually got all the players on the table. This is the call to adventure. We're setting off on everything. All the characters are involved, even though we haven't really seen the princess yet. She's there. And when he says she travels to the mountain of power, she is to be his, he's not talking about she's joining his cult. He's talking about she's going to be Thulsa Doom's wife. And this is a subtext that was, again, cut from the film, but footage from this actually exists, and I think you can find it on YouTube. But there are really 3 kinds of women in Conan the Barbarian, and they are warriors /wives, I would say. They are dangers, and they are props. And unfortunately, because we are talking about sword and sorcery, a lot of the women are props. So among the warrior wives, I would say we've got Conan's mother and Valeria. And we know Conan's mother just won't take any guff. I mean, even when their village is being attacked, Conan's father tries to hold her back, and she just shrugs him off in like 2 seconds, takes her sword, and she's out there, right? And to the point that, like, even Rexor and Thorgrim, who just helped sack the village, won't take her on. They wait till Thulsa Doom gets there. So we know she's bad, you know? And then, of course, there's Valeria, who is in every way the equal of Conan. I would even say she's better than Conan, because if Conan had listened to her, a lot of things that were bad would not have happened. but also, granted, if Conan had listened to her, we might not get the rest of the movie. But Valeria is awesome. She's incredible. She's really, really good. Then we get dangers, you know, the unknown dangers of women, because this is targeted towards adolescent males for the most part. And so we get the witch, you know, where he finds Subutai, the kind of wolf witch, which I called a succubus in the earlier episode. And then we get these other witches, and they don't do a whole lot, you know, when Subutai and Conan are high on the Black Lotus, they walk by a whole mess of women that are just kind of leaning up against the wall. And one of them says something along the lines like, a pittance to protect you from evil, or something like that. And Subutai kind of sneers at her and says, I am evil. And then Conan laughs and says, they're all sluts. Now, a lot of folks have taken that to mean that they're prostitutes. And you can certainly look at it that way. But I don't really think that's what they are. I think they're more like fortune tellers. You know, they might be, you know, out to kind of rob passerbys of money, but not in a physical kind of way, more just kind of a grifter kind of way. But it seems like they're selling charms, or, you know, telling people's fortunes and stuff like that. And incidentally, there's, in that scene off to the right-hand side, if you're watching the letterbox version of the film and not the pan and scan, there's actually something quite perverse going on just to the right of the screen. And I'll let you guys discover that for yourselves. It's kind of funny. And then we get props. They're all the other women in the film, unfortunately. They're the sacrifice girl. Coming up, we've got a girl on the rocks that Thulsa Doom, granted, Thulsa Doom is a villain, so is just kind of casually throws away her life just to make a point to Conan. We get some dancers when they're celebrating in the background, and then we get Princess Yasmina. Well, why doesn't she fall into the wife category? Because she kind of is being, if she's not Thulsa Doom's wife, she's certainly his fiance. And we get to see this several times when in episode 4, when we talk about Conan reaching the Mountain of Power, he sees Princess Yasmina for the first time. And she is kind of initiating the ceremony in front of all the pilgrims to the Mountain of Power when Doom reveals himself. So she's very clearly in a favored position. And then later, when Conan goes into the Mountain of Power, she is kind of asleep at Thulsa Doom's feet, at his throne. But again, she's not really doing anything. She's kind of a prop. She's just kind of there. She's there to be rescued. She's there to be chained up at the rocks as kind of a prize at the Battle of the Mounds. And at the end of the film, when, and this, again, spoiler, Conan's able to save the princess and he's taking her back to her father, King Osric, she doesn't even get to walk. That's how much agency that she lacks. She doesn't even walk away. Conan carries her. And I'm guessing he doesn't carry her far, because the way the movie ends, I mean, they're like walking through a wasteland. It's a long ways. But she doesn't even walk on her own. So it's just kind of an interesting fact there. And then kind of a sad note to that, but it ties into what King Osric does not fare as well as we would think. In the commercial release of the film, Conan and his group, having taken all the prize money that King Osric is offering, they set off and kind of talk about it, and I'm going to get to that in a second. And we don't get to see what happened to King Osric. Like, King Osric's just there. At the end of the movie, it says that, hey, they got the princess, and they returned her to her father, King Osric. And that's it. And we're just kind of like, okay. But unfortunately, there does exist that kind of deleted footage of what happened to King Osric. And this guy named Yarrow comes, and he presents an offer from Thulsa Doom to King Osric and says, hey, he is a true prophet of Set, and he wishes that your daughter Yasmina may become his wife. And Osric is like, monstrous. You come in here and ask me that? Monstrous. And he's like, as you wish. It is the Grand Master's wish that by an alliance of the marriage, Zamora would become the kingdom of Set. And Osric replies, I am still king, and while I live, I shall never sanction this monstrous union, this hellish corruption. Guards! And the guards step out. And Yarrow just kind of turns to them and goes, if I were to ask you, would you slay this infidel for my master? And the guards just kill King Osric really, really brutally. And the footage that I've seen of it is kind of B-roll, because you can hear like Max von Sydow telling the people, okay, that's enough. like at the end of the scene before it cuts away. But yeah, King Osric winds up being murdered by his own guards, which again ties into the whole usurper thing. He may not have rightfully held the throne in the first place, and so he may not have had any loyalty. So we now move on to Valeria, who at this point in the story, I don't think she knows of Conan's history with Thulsa Doom. Subutai certainly does, because he's been around helping Conan try to track down the standard. And Valeria sees kind of the truth of it. She's just kind of like, look, let somebody else deal with Thulsa Doom. Like, he's a badass guy. He's a wizard. He's some kind of sorcerer. He can like speak to the dead. Let's somebody else mess with this. We just got enough treasure to become kings ourselves. Like, let's just bail on this adventure and just go live our lives and do whatever the heck we want to do. And it's kind of telling that in this scene, this is where, I said earlier that like Valeria was Conan's wife, but we weren't sure if Conan was Valeria's husband. Well, in this scene, she has a very impassioned speech where I believe that Conan is her husband. So this is a married couple that's talking here. And she starts talking about, and this is in the monomyth cycle, this would be the refusal of the call moment. She's saying, don't go. And there's kind of an archetypal character that shows up at the refusal of the call right before crossing the threshold. And that is called a threshold guardian. Now, sometimes the threshold guardian is a monster that you have to defeat. Cerberus or something like that in mythology, before you get access to Hades, you have to defeat Cerberus, or you have to solve the riddle of the Sphinx or something like that. It's some kind of a token trial that you have to pass before you can pass the threshold, continue on the adventure, and you're moving now into the other world, the world of the adventure. And sometimes the threshold guardians manifest themselves not as foes, but as friends. And they're holding people back. They say, oh, you really don't need to do that. Or you'll see this a lot in a romantic comedy. The guy's best friend who, oh, wait, you're crazy about her? She's way out of your league. What are you thinking? And that is textbook threshold guardian action right there. And it's, it shows up in just about every single story. Well, in Conan, this is Valeria's moment. It's refusal of the call. Conan, it doesn't refuse the call himself. She voices it for him. And she's kind of the voice of all his doubts. going, hey, we could quit right now. We could walk away. We've got everything. We've got everything we want. And she gives this great speech about how everybody else, that she's been alone her entire life. And she would walk by the tents and houses of other people and see figures holding themselves in the night. And she had nobody. And she tells Conan, she's like, look at all we have. Look at all we've got right now. We have each other. We have warmth. We have riches. Let other people walk by our tent and see us holding each other, and let them be alone for a change. And that's as close as it'll come to, it's kind of a heartbreaking scene because she's just voicing her greatest desire. And Conan, who in a very good counterpoint to the previous scene where he ignored all the riches and was just staring at Valeria, like she captured his entire world. Now that he has this purpose, this mission, Valeria is spilling her heart out to him, and he is staring at this kind of jade icon that is Thulsa Doom's insignia that he remembers from a child. And he kind of stops for a moment, looks at her, and then looks back at the insignia. And unfortunately, when Valeria wakes up in the morning, Conan has left her the eye of the serpent, and he takes off. And this next sequence is him crossing the threshold. We get this long montage scene with the music from Basil Poulidoris, I believe is called The Searching. And it is this long montage scene of him traveling on horseback in armor, very much a knight errant. It's almost like right out of the Holy Grail, out of the La Morte d'Arthur or something. He is searching, traveling, and just looking for all this stuff. And he meets the children of doom. And Mako has this great line of, they told him to put down his sword and return to the earth. And he says, ha, time enough for the earth and the grave. And it's just kind of really hilarious and sets it off and everything. And then he heads to the mounds, and we learn that these mounds had stood there since the time of the Titans. So they're prehistoric. And we meet Mako. And Mako is playing this wizard who may or may not be a necromancer, because he keeps referring to, he knows what the dead want. He knows what the dead think throughout the film and everything like that. And he's playing a very weird kind of character. Almost, it's somewhat influenced, I would guess. I have no proof of this, but I would guess, just somewhat influenced by Toshiro Mifune's character in The Seven Samurai. He plays this very odd samurai, Toshiro Mifune does. And Mako kind of has that same vibe. He's a very kind of like impish character. And he kind of threatens Conan, and Conan laughs at his threat. And Mako sees that, okay, I can't fool this guy. This guy's, kind of a good dude. And they make friends with one another. And we're going to leave it off at that. And we are going to pick up the pace with episode 4 and 5. Otherwise, I could be talking about Conan until the new series comes out. So, but we are going to talk about next time when Conan gets to the Mountain of Power and confronts Thulsa Doom and kind of deals with his belly of the whale and confronts death, and how all this stuff comes about, and what all the symbolism means, and the philosophy that goes along with it, because Thulsa Doom's philosophy and the riddle of steel plays a really big role in this film. So thank you for listening, and keep things clean and green. Out. You have been listening to Quantum Froth Dispatches by Michael Haspel. Music and other cues are provided by The Fat Rat. The song you're hearing is Monody, featuring Laura Brem. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit www.patreon.com/QFD. Thank you for listening, and we now return you to your mundane reality.